Imagine wanting to build a city with 40 different restaurants, a theater, a hospital, and enough food for 10,000 people. Now, build it on a steel hull and float it on the ocean. To even enter this game at a competitive level, your initial capital requirement is $2 billion. Looking at this scale comparison, a modern megaship is essentially a horizontal skyscraper. At nearly 1,200 feet long, it is only slightly shorter than the Empire State Building. But a skyscraper relies on a city's municipal grid. This vessel has to generate its own electricity, desalinate its own drinking water, process its own sewage, and push all of that mass across the globe at 20 knots. This pie chart breaks down the industry's highly consolidated oligopoly. Just 3 corporations, Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian Cruise Line, control roughly 80% of all global passengers. Keeping a floating microeconomy operational requires constant, massive expenditure. Before a single passenger buys a drink or books an excursion, these vessels burn through roughly $920,000 every single day to maintain basic functionality. How does a business model survive when its primary assets cost billions of dollars up front, hundreds of thousands of dollars a day to run, and are constantly exposed to hurricanes and changing geopolitical borders? While the world's merchant cargo fleet is built almost entirely in shipyards across Asia, cruise ships require extremely labor-intensive, specialized craftsmanship and complex marine engineering tightly held in Europe. Nearly every modern cruise ship in existence is constructed by one of 3 specific entities: Fincantieri in Italy, Chantiers de l'Atlantique in France, and the Meyer Group in Germany. The 80-20 system explains these $2 billion price tags. Cruise lines provide 20% down, while European export credit agencies guarantee the 80% remainder. They provide 12-year loans to preserve domestic jobs, but upon delivery, massive debt service begins immediately. These multi-billion-dollar fleets, operated by American-based corporations, only exist at their current scale because European taxpayers directly subsidize the massive construction risks. Walking down the cruise terminals of Miami reveals a stark operational reality. The corporate headquarters sit in high-rises just miles away, but the ships themselves are registered offshore in Nassau, Panama, or Valletta. International maritime law dictates that a ship is a floating piece of territory, subject only to the laws of the country where it is registered. The maritime industry calls this flying a flag of convenience. Section 883 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code completely exempts foreign-registered shipping companies from U.S. corporate taxes. By incorporating in tax havens, major cruise conglomerates bypass the 21% U.S. rate, dropping their average tax to less than 1%. This legal shield creates a strict operational boundary in U.S. waters. The Passenger Vessel Services Act strictly prohibits foreign-flagged vessels from transporting passengers directly between 2 domestic U.S. ports, without stopping at a distant foreign port in between. There is only one major exception operating a fully domestic U.S. itinerary: Norwegian Cruise Line's Pride of America, which sails the Hawaiian Islands. Complying with U.S. domestic shipping laws requires the ship to be U.S. built, fly the U.S. flag, and hire an American crew, driving operating costs significantly higher. For the rest of the massive global fleet, the major cruise lines happily accept the logistical constraint of international detours. The corporate tax savings generated by flying a foreign flag are simply too massive to ignore. The financial savings of offshore registry extend far past corporate taxes directly into the internal decks of the ship. Running the hotel and dining operations for 6,500 passengers requires a constant workforce of at least 2,500 employees. Because the vessel flies a foreign flag, it operates completely outside the jurisdiction of U.S. labor laws, minimum wage statutes, and overtime regulations. Maritime contracts demand 308 hours a month, with 0 rest days, paying an equivalent hourly rate under $2.30. This workforce is strictly stratified, Western officers at the top, while global South seafarers perform the invisible, grueling labor below. To keep base operating expenses incredibly low, cruise lines automatically charge daily gratuities of $15 to $20 to the passenger's account. This strategy shifts the financial burden of payroll directly from the corporation to the consumer. The physical majesty of the megaship and the artificially low ticket prices advertised to fill it to capacity are functionally subsidized by a legally deregulated global labor force. Even with heavy tax exemptions and incredibly cheap labor, the physical logistics of moving a city require astronomical resources. A megaship underway consumes between 150 and 250 tons of fuel every day just to keep the propeller spinning. Combine that fuel burn with daily food provisioning, port fees, and the massive European debt service that activates the moment the ship leaves the yard, and the fixed daily burn rate becomes unrelenting. A cruise ship is a highly leveraged financial instrument. It is constructed on subsidized European debt, protected by Caribbean tax havens, and powered by international labor. Because its daily costs are extremely rigid, this massive machine absolutely cannot afford to sit idle or sail below capacity. It must stay full. To guarantee that occupancy, base ticket fares are frequently sold at a loss. The real profit engine doesn't start until you step on board. In Part 2, we will examine how these companies use environmental loopholes, predatory casino margins, and high-margin beverage packages to separate you from your money, turning your captivity into their balance sheet. A standard 7-day Caribbean vacation on a modern megaship costs remarkably little. You can routinely secure a ticket for around $400, which breaks down to just $57 a day for all-inclusive lodging, transportation, and dining. To build a $2 billion vessel, staff it with thousands of crew, and burn massive reserves of fuel, operators incur immense physical and labor costs. On paper, charging $57 a day should be financial suicide. This bar chart compares the average net margins across the hospitality sector. While standard land-based hotel chains typically capture an 8 to 10% profit margin, the major cruise conglomerates regularly achieve net margins of 16 to 19%. This mathematical paradox is solved by a classic retail strategy. That remarkably cheap ticket is a loss leader. The industry utilizes the vacation as a delivery mechanism for a masterfully engineered commercial ecosystem, a closed-loop economy where the real wealth extraction begins only after the passenger is trapped on board. By drastically discounting base fares, cruise lines operate a highly effective two-sided platform. They absorb an initial loss to guarantee occupancy rates consistently push past 100%, packing the vessel with a captive consumer base. Once in international waters, the second side of the platform activates, on-board spending. Because the ship operates free from strict land-based taxes and regulations, gross margins on casino games and alcohol regularly exceed 80%. To accelerate this spending, operators systematically remove the psychological friction of paying. Cash is entirely eliminated, replaced by RFID wristbands, room keys, and mobile apps that gamify every transaction down to a simple tap. By pushing limited-time digital discounts on drink packages, premium dining, and Wi-Fi, companies successfully secure nearly 50% of their high-margin onboard revenue before the passenger even sets foot on the ship. The vessel functions as a perfectly enclosed microeconomy. Consumers are separated from their money with minimal friction, allowing the cruise line to maximize the financial yield of every single guest. When a ship docks at an independent, traditional port city, the cruise line's financial monopoly is broken by economic leakage. Passengers walk down the gangway and spend their cash at local restaurants, independent bars, and family-run tour operators. That capital escapes the cruise line's direct capture. The industry's solution to stopping this leakage was to buy their own geography. Major conglomerates purchased and developed fully corporate-owned private islands across the Caribbean and the Bahamas. On these islands, independent vendors do not exist. Every single dollar spent on overpriced cabanas, premium cocktails, and water park passes flows directly back to the parent company's treasury. The profitability of this strategy is staggering, with singular properties like Royal Caribbean's Coco Cay projected to generate over $600 million in direct annual revenue. By privatizing the destination itself, cruise lines have built a leak-proof financial loop, capturing maximum yield at every stage of the traveler's journey without losing a cent to a local economy. Yet, continually operating a massive steel structure and corrosive saltwater introduces severe physical liabilities to this cash-generating machine. International maritime laws dictate that passenger ships undergo mandatory structural overhauls and technical inspections in an out-of-water dry dock at least twice every 5 years. Removing a megaship from the ocean triggers a dual financial crisis. While a standard shipyard bill costs millions of dollars in direct fees, the far more damaging consequence is the absolute loss of operating revenue. With no tickets sold and no captive audience spending at the bars or casinos, a megaship bleeds over $1 million a day in unrealized sales while sitting out of service. Because this extreme financial vulnerability threatens their margins, operators must meticulously plan these maintenance windows up to 10 years in advance, absorbing massive capital expenditures just to maintain their baseline capacity to earn. Now, an even larger existential liability is threatening those margins: tightening global environmental regulations and strict carbon taxes. Under the European Union emissions trading system, cruise lines must now pay for their carbon output, translating into multi-million-dollar annual compliance liabilities for any vessel operating in European waters. This visual representation shows the International Maritime Organization's Carbon Intensity Indicator formula. It grades a ship's operational efficiency by dividing its annual carbon emissions by its gross tonnage multiplied by the distance traveled. Because this equation was designed for cargo ships, which run continuously over massive oceans, it heavily penalizes cruise vessels. Cruise ships sail relatively slow, short routes between islands, keeping their distance traveled mathematically low. Simultaneously, their carbon emissions remain high due to the massive hotel load. Even when securely tied to a dock, a megaship must burn fuel constantly to power air conditioning, sewage treatment, and kitchens for thousands of guests. Navigating these strict metrics forces companies to pump billions of dollars into green retrofits. The cruise ship is a brilliantly optimized casino, where the house always wins, but the mechanical and regulatory costs to keep that house floating are rising so fast that only the largest global conglomerates can survive.